Yo, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of Unfucking Your CX. I'm your host, Zach Hamilton. But look, through all your messages, I know it's abundantly clear you don't care about me. You care about who is in the hot seat and what knowledge they're going to drop today. And so I am so excited. We have Dr. Chris from Down Under, who is joining us. So, Dr. Chris, welcome to the hot seat.
Thanks, Jack. It's great to be here, and it's great to be chatting about my favorite topic. So, yeah, looking forward to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Dr. Chris, set the scene for us, right? We both love chatting about customer experience, but where are we going to do it at? Your favorite coffee shop, your favorite pub, maybe a favorite restaurant?
Yeah. So, at the moment I'm down here in Sydney, so I'm in a suburb called Freshwater, which is by the beach. So it's a great part of the world on the northern beaches of Sydney, and I spent about 18 years actually in California. So it's the other side of the coast. So, but another beautiful spot to have this chat.
Very nice. I love it. To me, it's either oceans or the mountains. So that's where the creativity comes out. But Dr. Chris, you are well known, not just for the customer experience and your work in it, but as a global thought leader in business leadership. And so you've seen everything. You've helped executives, you've helped brands. What is that one topic right now in customer experience that when you hear it just makes you cringe the most?
Yeah, I mean, for me, that comes down to the heart of why I got into what I do, and I've always been sort of frustrated by leaders that really profess to really be customer centric and profess that, yes, our business is all about the customer. And then when you actually experience an interaction with their organization, you don't get that at all, right? You get the opposite of that. You feel like they don't really give a shit about who you are and your
Hmm.
business. And so that's always been the key frustration for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It's one of those things where I think they just use this customer obsession or customer centric jargon to represent themselves on, earnings calls or in front of investors or in front of the public. And I don't even know if they know, like, do executives know what customer centricity really means?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's the point. I think you're so no one's going to argue with you when you say, "Look, we're customer centric and we want to be more customer centric." That's kind of it's something that everyone aspires to be. So it's sort of a nice cover for other things in many ways. But I think that most executives don't really understand what it is to be customer centric, and it's not just about the customer experience department. You don't just hire someone to head up customer experience and take care of that customer experience stuff, right? It's something that is across the DNA of the organization. It's part of how that business operates and regardless of what your role is. And, most of my career has been with large businesses, so really complex, larger businesses. And so it is a little bit more difficult in terms of the challenge of being more customer centric. But it comes down to fundamentals, right? The real basic stuff, which is, do you know what it's like to be a customer of yours? Have you felt what it's like to be a customer? Can you put yourself in the customer? And a lot of the work we've done over the years has been bringing executives back into their organization as though they're a customer, right? We call them customer immersion programs where we get them to expose themselves to, if it's a telco, get them to call the call center and see what it's like to kind of go through the experience of being a customer. And then ask them, is this the way in which you want your organization to treat customers? Can we do better?
This is so fascinating, Dr. Chris, because the last few guests that I've had in the hot seat, everyone's been talking about experiencing your own brand. It's so interesting. I'm a true believer of that. Even when I was at Aaron's, where I spent, a lot of my time out in the field before I moved into the home office and then became, chief experience officer. Even when I was a chief experience officer, my team and I required our team to be in the field a minimum 2 days a week at different stores and really experiencing, not just that experience our customers have when they walk into our stores or, those online orders come through and how how we're delivering them. I'd ask them to go on the delivery truck, but also think about the burden that we're putting on our employees with everyone has a different program that they want to be, piloted or initiated in the front line. And how does that impact the way in which they serve our customers?
Mm,
And
mm.
so I'm really curious, like, why do you think executives don't spend that time? like in their
Yeah.
stores or in their branches or in their call centers, really like getting to the heart of it.
The very best executives do, so there's no question that the best do, but I think it's easy not to. I think there's a lot of, in larger organizations, you can become very insulated from actually what's going on, and you can get away without really knowing what's happening, from a customer's point of view. And sometimes there's a belief that, well, actually, you know, there's an attitude in the business that, well, it's actually, that's kind of more of a cost center. It's not really a value driver for our organization. And, in certain scenarios, that can be the case where you've got monopolies and things like that, where, essentially the monopoly takes advantage of customers, right? They can get away with bad behavior essentially. And so they do. But what you find even in those industries is over time, you get entries like Virgin, right? Richard Branson will come into the airline industry and say, hey, there's a better way to do this and disrupt that. And that's what's happened certainly in the UK with Virgin over there against British Airways, for instance, and even the US, that they've done a good job. So it creates opportunity. So when you treat customers poorly, opportunities are created for others, right? So I think that's the other side of things. But fundamentally, it's a leadership and challenge. And whenever I have an interaction with an organization where it's a negative one, I think about what's the leadership doing to create an environment where this person can't deliver, or is it this person or is it the environment that they're in? And it's usually the environment that they're in, right? It's usually the culture that they're a part of that's creating that poor experience for the customer. And so it fundamentally comes back to the senior.
You're so spot on there. I think the other great example, and I've used it a couple times now in the podcast, is if you think about those disruptors, I also think about like T-Mobile when they had just absolutely destroyed kind
Mm.
of the big three out here in the
Yep.
States. And it all came down to that uncarrier strategy. And John Leisure at the time, he would spend an hour or so every day just listening to calls into the contact center and listening to what those customer frictions were. And essentially that became the Uncarrier program, which was, we're just going to create better experiences, but they branded it as the Uncarrier movement. So when you think about that, you think of these other brands, Chris, that you've been talking about, what's your first player for executive leaders to really become customer centric like they say they are?
So I think the first thing is to get out of their comfort zone and actually do what John did, which you just described. And that is get into a call center, get into a retail shop, whatever the interface point is between you and the customers, get into that environment and see firsthand what's going on. I mean, that's sort of number one. That there isn't any real substitute for that. I think it's easy to sit back and look at the numbers, look at what the NPS scores are saying, what the CSATs, and they're all abstractions, right? And underneath them, there can be something very different going on. I'll give you an example. Down here in Australia, we worked with Telstra, which is equivalent to the AT&T in the US. And there's a great leader here in Australia called David Thodey, who was the CEO at the time. And they would, every Monday morning, they would actually just review some of the data. So they'd look at the numbers. What's the NPS look like? And they'd actually make some phone calls to customers that gave them 10 out of 10 and some phone calls to customers that gave them 0 out of 10, right? So both ends of the spectrum. And what's interesting, right, is David called a customer and, gave them 0. I think they gave them 10 out of 10. And so the customer was really happy with the retail experience that they had. So it was a touch point, right? They walked in, there was a great person, they had a great interaction. When the conversation went a little bit further, the guy actually said, look, we had a great interaction, but I was actually coming in on another time and I was asking to get my contract cancelled. And at the time, I was just told that I couldn't get the contract cancelled. And Dave said, well, why did you want the contract cancelled? He said, my wife passed away and we no longer needed the phone. And yet, the contract was not cancelable. And so, David was obviously taken back and said, why the hell would we do that? Like, why would we want a contract for a customer's passed away wife to continue, right? Why can't we just, what sort of policy is it that doesn't allow for that? And, this is a customer that gave them 10 out of 10. So it's you need to dive into what's going on. It's anecdotal, yes, but these things are going on all the time. And unless you're really understanding some of this detail, then there's all sorts of sort of nefarious things going on at the front lines that don't need to happen, that damage the brand, that, those stories get around. People say, why the hell, would I do business with these guys, right? And so you create tremendous headwinds for the business by doing the wrong thing. And that's what, great executives get their hands dirty, understand what's going on, and then fix it.
I love that example, especially as player tip number one. I think too often execs live in the clouds versus being in the dirt where everything's happening. What's player tip number two?
So, I think another good example for me is really getting engaged with employees, right? So, I mean, a lot of the work that we sort of advocate is, being customer centric and so on. But as you mentioned, I mean, employees fundamentally are the ambassadors of the organization. They're the representatives. They're the ones that most of us see when we engage with an organization. And not only whether we're interacting with them, but we're also, they're designing the systems and processes that we interact with. And so, again, the best leaders are engaging the employees and making sure that the right people are in the right roles when it comes to customer experience. I think there's a great Chinese saying, a man without a smiling face shouldn't open a shop. And I love that phrase, right? So making sure that you've got people that want to interact with people on the front lines and are interacting with customers, because that makes a huge difference, right? So, I think executives engaging with employees, making sure the right employees are involved, being involved in training and development of them as well. Herbert Jolly, who was the CEO of Best Buy, was really well known for going in and doing some of the training sessions and helping people on the floor at Best Buy interact more effectively with customers, be sort of more value creators rather than just order takers. So I think that's a key thing also.
Yeah, I think it's so important. When brands, when executives say, "Hey, we're customer centric," what I always like to do, Dr. Kristen, is I like to look at their kind of Glassdoor reviews and look at, okay, what are their employees saying? Even their employees who are rating the brand like 4 or 5 stars out of the 5 stars. I also like to dig in and say, okay, well, what are they saying? And ultimately, you can't be customer centric if you're not employee centric first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because to
Yeah.
your point, every experience is delivered through an employee. Rather that is you're on the front lines in a retail store, or you're the employee who is delivering code, right? Because ultimately when you are, delivering code or you're the quality assurance tester, well, if you're not engaged, then maybe you're going to half-ass it. And so
Yeah.
then ultimately that half-ass code is going to create online friction and calls in the contact center, and it's going to be hard for your employees to deliver great experiences. So, I always love to check that balance, like you mentioned. Well, are you employee centric as well?
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Yeah. No,
what's the
absolutely.
third player tip?
So third thing, for us, and we're big advocates of, this is all sort of a little bit warm and fuzzy, right? And a bit sort of fluffy almost, right? Is what a lot of people would say. Okay, this all sounds good. But we're big on measurement. And so we have a diagnostic tool that we recommend people use. And it's a bit like, if you want to lose some weight, you do need to get on the scale and find out where you're at. And so, part of this is to say, well, how customer centric are we? Are we doing the things that we know customer centric organizations do? And there's a set of behaviors that we researched almost, well, 12 years ago now that really identified what are the core behaviors of really customer centric businesses? What are the things that they do that other
Mm.
businesses don't? And so we've got a model that helps organizations diagnose that. So really understand what is their culture? Where are they strong? Where are they weak? Are they really good when it comes to understanding customer needs? Are they good at sort of addressing those, measuring satisfaction, things like that? Or are they sort of weak on those things? Is the customer sort of not really part of the conversation at the leadership and executive level? So I think measuring that, having an understanding of where you stack up, benchmarking where you are versus others in the world and in your industry is a really important measure to say, let's make this more tangible and let's actually move the needle, right? Let's actually do more of this, do more of these behaviors over time. So I think that's a key thing that most organizations don't have a way of doing this, right? They measure the output, which is a score, which is kind of too late. The score's already been given. We're interested in measuring the inputs. What are the things that create those scores?
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I think the key to that is you're measuring the behaviors of the organization. Too often, what I see is these assessments are measuring kind of what's your technology stack look like. They're measuring kind of tactical pieces of, surveys and closing the loop. And yes, those things they're important, but what I love is behaviorally, what do we look like as an organization? Because essentially it's the behaviors that drive the experience. I always say, your employee behavior is your brand experience. And so I love that you guys are really focused on the behaviors. And Dr. Chris, this has been a fascinating conversation. I'm really curious. One, if any of our listeners want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
Yeah, look, easiest way to find me is on LinkedIn. So, I'm on LinkedIn, but also our business is called marketculture.com. So, Market Culture has got a lot of resources on there for people that are interested in this, leadership resources, and lots of tools, lots of case studies. How do you do this stuff? All of that sort of good content. And then I've also got a podcast called the Relentless Leader podcast, which is all about talking to CEOs that are customer centric and what do they do. So there's sort of the three ways to get in touch.
Yeah, amazing. For all of our listeners, we'll drop the links below so you can just access those very, very quickly. But Dr. Chris, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you for coming to the hot seat. Don't be a stranger. Please, please, please come back.
Thank you. Thanks, Zach. Enjoy
Yeah,
the conversation.
cheers.